in the Eastern Bay. We might be able to get him to crack out a song on the karaoke. He's been
John
known
Rolls.
to do that of late. Oh, yeah. He's born and bred in Kawerau. And he's now residing in the Eastern Bay of Plenty. We might get him across to the Kosi Club. The mayor particularly might get him across the Kosi Club, and he might sing us the old Shira Moana Marie, which was all about Kawerau.
The question is, if we could drag the likes of the chief executive of the Newmarket Business Association off to Kawerau, what do you think, Mark?
I'm down for the fish and chips. Sounds fabulous. And a drink at the Kosi Club couldn't be better.
The other thing is, Mark, fair's fair. I've spent a lot of time. I live in Auckland. I've spent a lot of time down in Newmarket. So why don't you come to Kawerau and have a bit of a cultural experience?
I understand that you were the Kawerau pie eating champ 2 years in a row, Shane. Are you yourself a bit of a celebrity? Are you a bit of a celebrity when you go home?
Well, sort of. Now I'm on the panel, for sure. Sort of. 2 years in a row. You wouldn't get away with it now, but I'm talking about 1988. I decrowned Fat Albert, who was a well-known pie eater in town, and I was only 15 or 16 years of age. You wouldn't know this, but I was quite skinny at the time, and I beat him.
There's a wider issue in all this, Ella, isn't there? And that is really, it's wonderful to actually see beyond your vision of the towns that one might usually go and go to your smaller places like Kawerau or Tokoroa or Taupo, places like these,
Absolutely. But first, ngā mihi ki a koe, Shane. Lovely as always to catch up. And I love what you're doing. Thank you very much for taking the initiative, because we have to grow our domestic tourism market. That's going to be a reality for the foreseeable future. And it's going to take entrepreneurs who think like Shane to get us off our couches when we are able to move out of 1.5, 2 and 3 and back into the world to discover what an extraordinary place we have, what a fabulous history. And I love Kawerau. I love going for walks by the river and into the forest. It's up the Maunga, it's just such a special place. So good on you. If I weren't locked down in Auckland, I'd send you 50 words myself, bro.
Anytime, Emma. Anytime.
All right, you've convinced us, Shane. Thank you very much from all of us here at the panel. Well, just around the panel, Mark, where did you grow up?
In Dunedin, in the deep south.
Lovely, yeah. Ella?
I was born in Kaitaia, Ahipara, but I've lived in Auckland since I was 6 years old. So I'm a townie, I'm an urbie, a westie, eminently proud of it. I feel like I'm whoa every time I say westie because it's built into the system. But an unashamed urbie Aucklander.
Yeah. Do you still have connections to Ahipara?
I do. I mean, we still have our whānau land, and I still spend a lot of time up there involved in iwi business. And it's always, you always know when you're going home. For me, it's going through the Mangamoka Gorge or along the Manganui Strait that I know I'm back in my whenua.
More of your comments around Mount Eden Prison. There's been a lot. We'll have that tomorrow, but for the meantime, Mark Knopf, Thomas, Dr. Ella Henry, thank you very much. You've been wonderful today.
Kia ora.
I'm Wallace Chapman, Checkpoint next. Back with you, 3:45 tomorrow, Wednesday. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo rerangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, mystery surrounds a new case of COVID-19. This time a maintenance worker at an Auckland isolation hotel who apparently had no face-to-face contact with guests. So how did he get infected, and will there be others? There's also 12 new cases linked to the Auckland cluster that just keeps growing. Only a fraction of port workers have been tested for the virus. And Auckland schools are divided over whether to bring back face-to-face classes for some students at Alert Level 3. Frustration at Auckland checkpoints, why a letter from your boss isn't enough to get into the city, and how the backlog of exemption requests may last longer than the lockdown itself.
Rnz News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. Officials are flummoxed about how a maintenance worker at a managed isolation facility came to be infected with COVID-19. The man who works at the Ridges Hotel has the same strain of the virus as a woman who returned from the United States in late July and stayed at the hotel. The minister responsible for isolation facilities says the case is not linked to any incident, system breakdown or any wider outbreak at this stage. The worker tested positive 2 weeks after the woman left the hotel, and CCTV and room entry data has been reviewed, and interviews with the two have failed to find any obvious points of connection between them. Megan Woods says the woman's room had a stringent cleaning and has sat empty since she left.
The room underwent hospital-grade cleaning with hydrogen peroxide vapour sanitiser using a bioqual machine on the 14th of August.
Megan Woods says the case highlights how tricky and insidious this coronavirus is. And today, the Director General of Health confirmed 13 new COVID-19 cases in the country, 12 of which are linked to the South Auckland cluster and one thought likely to be linked. The police are deciding whether to take action about the man who started rumours posted on social media last week about the family at the centre of the latest COVID-19 outbreak. The rumours circulated on Facebook claimed a woman became infected after breaking into an isolation facility to see her boyfriend. A reporter, Dylan Reeve, told RNZ's Afternoons he had spoken to the man who made the original post, and he regrets it and has been expecting a visit from the police. More than 2,200 vehicles have been turned around by the police at the checkpoint on Auckland's boundary, and one person has been arrested. The police say as of yesterday afternoon, more than 69,000 vehicles have been stopped since the checkpoints were set up last week. Sarah Robson reports.
Yesterday, a man tried to evade the police at a checkpoint at Bombay on State Highway 1 by driving down the truck bypass lane. The police say there was a short pursuit which was abandoned because of the man's dangerous driving. He was later located at a property in Drury and arrested. He is now facing a number of charges and will appear in court later this month. Drivers passing through any of the 13 checkpoints are being reminded to have the correct documentation or exemption. The police have issued 4 warnings to people for breaching the Alert Level 3 restrictions. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
A review of dementia care homes during the last lockdown has found inconsistencies in the use of personal protective equipment. But the report by Ombudsman Peter Boscher says mostly there was good infection control and residents were treated with dignity. Inspectors visited 6 private care homes, none of which had COVID cases. Mr Boscher was concerned one had a blanket policy of refusing visits, even if a patient was dying. But he says most were creative about family contact, such as using technology or allowing a family to wave through closed windows. He has made 4 recommendations, including visiting exemptions when someone is dying. The number of people able to attend the sentencing of the mosque gunman has been almost halved due to the new COVID-19 restrictions. Brenton Tarrant will be sentenced next week for the murder of 51 people in the attacks on 2 Christchurch mosques last March. Justice Manda has this evening issued an instruction on how the sentencing will proceed in the High Court at Christchurch under Alert Level 2. It was expected about 400 victims, their families and support people would attend, but Justice Manda says courts can only accommodate about 230 visitors under the restrictions, so only victims and selected media will be allowed into the main courtroom. Michelle Obama has delivered her strongest rebuke of Donald Trump, criticising the president for stoking chaos in sensitive times. The first day of the Democratic National Convention has wrapped, featuring pre-recorded speeches from the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, Senator Bernie Sanders and finally the former First Lady. Michelle Obama called Donald Trump a president in way over his head.
Whenever we look to this White House for some leadership or consolation or any semblance of steadiness, what we get instead is chaos, division, and a total and utter lack of empathy.
Earlier, Bernie Sanders said Donald Trump is leading the US towards authoritarianism. It's 5 minutes past 5. The All Blacks coach Ian Foster says new captain Sam Cane is making good progress from his latest head knock despite being deemed unavailable for the North versus South match. The Chiefs flanker suffered a concussion and left the field after making a tackle in a Super Rugby Aotearoa match 10 days ago. As a result, Cane was one of several leading players not considered for selection for next weekend's inter-island fixture. Foster says with the Chiefs now disassembled, the All Blacks skipper hasn't been able to go through the return-to-play protocols, but selectors are happy with how he's tracking.
He's been taking some time, is looking really good. He's getting better and better every day, so we're hopeful that won't take too long. But again, it's more of a precautionary thing now.
Ian Foster, Blues skipper Patrick Tuipulotu will lead the North Island side, while All Black teammate Sam Whitelock will captain the South Island. The lawyer for Kiwis and Gold Coast player Kevin Proctor is confident there is nothing to substantiate the allegation that Proctor bit his Kiwis teammate and Cronulla halfback Sean Johnson in an NRL match at the weekend. Proctor will deny the charge when he appears before the NRL judiciary tonight for the alleged biting incident, but faces a lengthy suspension if found guilty. Lawyer Tim Fuller has described the incident as extraordinary, saying there was no clear evidence that Johnson was bitten. That's the news.
Election day delayed leaves candidates with time on their hands.
I have taken leave from work and I have checked my bank balance this morning and crunched some numbers since the Prime Minister's announcement.
As MPs head to Parliament.
It's a bit like, you played a great game of rugby through to the final whistle and then the ref blows the whistle for another 10 minutes each way extra time.
And world leaders talk about us.
They beat it. It was like front page. They beat it because they wanted to show me something. The problem is big surge in New Zealand. So, it's terrible. We don't want that.
Give us your votes and listen to Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel Peninsula. Rain in Northland, isolated showers elsewhere. Rain spreading south tonight or tomorrow morning before easing to isolated showers tomorrow night. Nor'easterlies, gale in exposed places for a time. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloud increasing. Isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls possible. Nor'easterlies strengthening, gale in Gisborne tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also Taihape and Wairarapa. Fine tonight, occasional rain tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Buller through to Fiordland. Becoming cloudy. Rain developing tonight. Heavy falls clearing tomorrow night. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, high cloud, patchy light rain tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, fine spells and a chance of a shower. Rnz National. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. And some breaking news this evening. There's been a major security breach relating to personal information of returnees staying at an isolation facility in Auckland. Now, we have just to hand a press release from the Ministry of Business and Innovation. It says that a security guard employed by First Security posted an image to a private group on Snapchat whilst on shift at the Sheraton 4 Points managed isolation facility. It included the names, room numbers, arrival and departure dates of 27 returnees staying at the facility, along with the names and room numbers of 5 staff members. The press release goes on to say that the information has since been removed and was removed on Saturday at about midday after agencies became aware of the breach and they had identified the security guard at the source. The guard has now been removed from duty at the managed isolation facility and First Security is undertaking an employment investigation. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner has also been notified and we'll bring you more on this story as it comes to hand. But first this evening, authorities are scrambling to get to the bottom of a new case of COVID-19. That is not connected to the Noan cluster in Auckland. A maintenance worker at the Ridges Hotel managed isolation facility has tested positive. There are 13 new confirmed cases in the community today, but how this worker got COVID remains a mystery. Logan Church reports.
Another day, another COVID mystery. This time a maintenance worker at the Ridges Hotel managed isolation facility. He's tested positive for COVID-19, but is not linked to the existing community outbreak. The Ministry of Health has confirmed genome sequencing shows the male worker has the same COVID sequence as a person who recently arrived from the USA and tested positive in late July. CCTV footage and keycard data at the ridges was combed through, but no one could identify where or when he could have been infected.
This is someone who's is a maintenance worker who works for the hotel staff, so doesn't have interaction directly with any of the guests. So once again, a little bit of a mystery here, one that we will be investigating fully to find out.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says the worker was tested on August the 13th as part of routine testing. He had previously shown some symptoms, but he had put those down to an underlying health condition. His positive results came through on Sunday. The infected returnee was at the Ridges Hotel between the 28th and 31st of July before being moved to the Jet Park quarantine facility after testing positive on the 1st of August. Their room was scrubbed to a hospital level of cleanliness, but the minister responsible for managed isolation and quarantine facilities, Megan Woods, says he didn't enter it.
Well, what we do know is that the maintenance worker was not in the room of the US returnee after it was vacated on the 31st of July. In fact, no one in the hotel entered the room until the 14th of July when it was entered to be cleaned. We have verified that by using the room entry data, the card swipe access to the room.
The hotel has been deep cleaned. Ms Woods says it has a perfect record as an isolation facility with no incidents to date. Jane is staying in the Ridges for her 14-day managed isolation. She's already had her day 3 test, but was called today to be told everyone at the facility had to be retested.
Today, we actually found out, we got a call that they were testing everyone in the facility again. We had our first test, so basically they test everyone in the hotel on day 3 and day 11. And they called us and asked us to come for another test just after this confirmed case. So everyone had to go down again today and get tested.
Health Minister Chris Hipkins says he's confident this case is contained and isn't the start of another cluster. The man also attended 2 of the Emmanuel Cook Islands Good News Fellowship Church services on the morning and evening of the 9th of August. All attendees are being considered as close contacts and are in self-isolation.
All of the information we have suggests that this is contained, that this is just one person. Obviously, that investigation work is now underway. The immediate close contacts, so the household and the work contacts that have been tested have all come back negative. So that is a very encouraging sign at this early stage.
Further genome sequencing and matching is being completed today. Meanwhile, cases linked to the ongoing community cluster continue to rise. 12 new cases confirmed today, with 1 more under investigation, but it's likely to be linked. 6 people are also in hospital. There are now 69 cases linked to that community cluster, a cluster Dr. Bloomfield says is set to become New Zealand's biggest to date. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
The government has backtracked on plans to urgently test every single person who had come into the ports of Auckland for COVID-19. Last week, the Ministry of Health issued a mandatory testing order for all workers at the Auckland and Tauranga ports as part of its border blitz. It had hoped to get all of those workers tested by midnight last night, but only managed to get about a fraction swabbed. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Nearly 3,500 ports workers have so far been tested for COVID-19, a sizable number but a long way off the 12,000 the government had planned to have tested. They'd included truck drivers, couriers, staff from the Ministry for Primary Industries, shipping agents and anyone else who had come into contact with the ports of Auckland since July 21st. That was more than 5,000 people from 800 organisations at the ports of Auckland alone. The Road Transport Forum had opposed the testing of truck drivers, saying they came into contact with hardly anyone at the borders. Ports of Auckland spokesman Matt Ball agrees it made sense to rein in the testing.
The scale of the previous order was huge and probably not necessary given the low or zero risk level for people like truck drivers. I think this is just about the ministry getting to grips and learning to understand how the supply chain and how ports work and the scale of the business and how many people actually interact with ports. So we've been having dialogue with them, and as a result, they have narrowed the scope of what's required. So that's great.
The government has amended the testing order it made last week for all workers and now only requires higher risk staff to be tested. They have until midnight Thursday to get it done.
It is now focused on what they called higher risk staff. So that's staff who have some interaction with ships, who are on board or work on or around ships. The previous numbers would have been over 5,000, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000. We're probably now looking at less than 1,000 people, and I would say that most of those have already been tested.
Matt Ball says the ports have been asking for testing since April and the government's been slow to respond. National Party leader Judith Collins says the ports appear to have been largely ignored in the government's border testing regime.
Well, it has to have come in from the border somewhere, either a sea border or the air border. I mean, it has to have come in from somewhere. So I think that certainly information that Dr. Megan Woods provided us with this last week now, was clear that the genome of the strain that's been found here is not one that was prevalent here before, and she believes it came from Australia or the UK. That's of what they know. The fact that they don't know is also concerning. So it seems as though the seaports were basically ignored in any border policy, which seems odd.
Ongoing testing will now continue at the ports of Auckland, and Health Minister Chris Hipkins says it's also being rolled out at other ports around the country.
A dedicated testing team is operating extended hours to ensure that workers all have access to COVID-19 testing, including those who are working the night shift and the twilight shift. At the port of Tauranga, a dedicated swabbing site was established by midday yesterday to begin testing around 6,000 potential workers at that site. I've been advised that by 9:30 this morning, 95 workers that were considered to be high priority had already been tested alongside others. Testing is also underway at the 8 other ports around New Zealand.
The government still doesn't know what the source of the latest COVID cluster in Auckland is. The first case is believed to be a worker at the Americold facility who displayed symptoms on July 31st. Testing at the borders will continue as health authorities work to figure out any gaps. Chris Hipkins says he will be issuing 2 public health orders by the end of the week, one formalising the testing regime for aircrew and the other formalising routine testing moving forward. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
New Zealand's pandemic response has been called out by none other than US President Donald Trump in a bizarre speech. Speaking in Minnesota, the leader of the free world described the South Auckland outbreak as a big surge. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The Kiwi response to COVID-19 has been lauded world over, but the latest setback is winning attention of a different kind, and from the highest quarters.
In fact, even New Zealand, you see what's going on in New Zealand.
President Donald Trump name-checking New Zealand while addressing a crowd in Minnesota and referencing the South Auckland cluster.
They beat it. It was like front page, they beat it because they wanted to show me something. The problem is big surge in New Zealand.
The big surge to which Donald Trump refers numbers 70 cases to date. Yesterday alone, the United States recorded nearly 42,000 new cases of COVID-19.
They were holding up names of countries and now they're saying whoops.
But it's not so much whoops they're saying here as what? The attention eliciting bewilderment from government parties.
Coming from the leader of a country that had 42,000 new cases just yesterday, I think it's an absurd comparison.
We have for a whole day what they have every 22 seconds of a day. That speaks for itself.
Obviously, it's patently wrong.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says there is no comparison to be made.
Every country is experiencing its own fight with COVID-19. It is a tricky virus, but not one where I would compare New Zealand's current status to the United States.
The opposition leader, Judith Collins, wasn't keen to weigh in.
I'm not here to talk about Donald Trump.
Look, I'm not making any comments about Donald Trump's statements. They are what they are.
But today it was Jerry Brownlee's statements which prompted comparisons with the leader of the free world. A fundraising email sent out with his signature last night disparages the media in what could be called a Trumpian fashion.
That's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
The email states, with endless wall-to-wall coverage, the deep resources of government and a favourable media, it is hard for anyone not to see Labour have the cards stacked in their favour.
I don't think that was undermining the media, it was stating a fact. The Prime Minister is on the airwaves every day. You're being very precious. You are particularly precious about people making a comment about how the media are covering things. We could go round and round in circles on this. I've said about all I'm saying.
The maligning of media is detrimental at a time when mistrust is high and conspiracy theories have been running rife, not helped by Mr Brownlee's own musings. Last week, he listed a series of supposedly interesting facts, as if to suggest the government was not telling the whole story. The party now clearly wanting to put that behind them.
Jerry has apologised for that. He's apologised to everybody, actually, hasn't he? He's apologised to the media, he's apologised to us all.
I've said that's unfortunate. I've said I'm sorry that people have taken it as being some kind of conspiracy accusation. It was never meant to be like that.
Today was Parliament's first day back since the election's false start, a chance for the opposition to zero in on the government's very real failings at the border. Instead, again, it's been distracted by its own missteps. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It's 21 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Let us know what you think of this new case. This is the maintenance worker at an isolation hotel who has tested positive for COVID-19. And also the security breach. A security guard at one isolation hotel has posted the names and details of some returnees in a hotel. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Some residents in northern Waikato are being forced to break COVID-19 border restrictions in order to buy food at a supermarket. The rural townships of Otawao and Akaaka are surrounded in the south by the Waikato River and in the north by Auckland's border. They're essentially trapped. For some, it means they haven't bought food for a week and others are breaking the law to do so. Liu Chen and Jordan Bond report.
Under current COVID restrictions, Waikato dairy farmer Sid cannot legally get to a supermarket. Just 5 minutes north of his place in the Waikato township of Otawao is the Auckland border town of Waiuku, where he normally does his food shopping. The problem is, it is in Auckland, where, unless exempted, there's no travel in or out.
Our particular road, it's not policed. You probably find that most of us are just carrying on and going into Waiuku anyway, which is, in actual fact, crossing the border, and we probably shouldn't be doing it. I guess you could say we're between a rock and a hard place, if you are really abiding by the law.
While buying food, he wears a mask and keeps his distance and goes home to his farm straight away. The other option is to drive an hour south to Huntly, but the way the roads and boundaries sit, it would mean he has to drive into Auckland and back out again, also against the rules, all just to get food.
It is working okay, but on the letter of law, we are not being law-abiding citizens by doing it.
It's a different story for Skeen, also in Otawa. He and his family of 4 haven't done any food shopping since Auckland moved into level 3 last week.
So normally Tuesday would be our shopping day. Fortunately, we've got a decent supply here. Being rural, we've got, chickens lay eggs, we've got our own veggie gardens and that sort of thing. So we're not self-sufficient, but we're okay. We're just hoping that the mess gets cleared up soon before we start running out of Pringles and whatnot.
Skeen says it is possible for him to get to Waiuku, but he's opted not to.
I could jump in my car and head up there now, but, obviously you're breaking the rules, which is sort of on your mind. But you also don't want to be putting people at risk. And I know it's sort of, it's only 5 minutes away, but ultimately a lot of people are making a lot of sacrifices at the moment. And you don't want to be the one that ruins that for everybody.
A Waikato District Councillor, Jackie Church, says others are in the same boat, cut off from everywhere, effectively on an island. She's organising food and care packages for those in need, but says they don't even have legal access to a pharmacy.
So those people there have been sitting quietly for the last 5 or 6 days. They have no dairy, no superette, no food produce shop, and no fuel. And I've been getting messages from them saying, well, we can't get out because we want to follow the rules, but we've got no supplies, so we're sitting tight.
This comes as other border teething issues frustrate legitimate businesses with jobs across the border. A few kilometres away in Bombay, the police checkpoint turned around dozens of cars today. Curtis Graham had a letter from his boss for a construction job a few kilometres down the road.
But they've stopped me because we need some type of letter from the Ministry of Health. There's a backlog of people that need it, so we don't have the confirmation letter from the Ministry of Health as of yet.
Alan McDonald from the Employers and Manufacturers Association says some of their members have been told it'll take 7 days for a ministry-approved border exemption.
Which is pointless, because the best case scenario will be out of level 3 within 7 working days. We're puzzled as well because a number of businesses and people have had exemptions that they applied for when we're under level 4 back in March and April, and they can't use those exemptions now. They're being told to reapply, and that's really just not good enough.
Mr McDonald says queues at the border are sometimes hours long for essential freight and businesses. There are now 13 checkpoints in the north and south. Nearly 70,000 vehicles had passed, with 97% being let through. For Checkpoint, Cord Jordan Bond, Aho.
While there were queues heading into Auckland today from the south, north of Auckland there were no queues at all. We sent reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Munro to see how nearby towns within the Auckland Supercity region are faring in lockdown.
I'm standing here in Matakana village where businesses say they rely heavily on foot traffic from Auckland, as well as locals who would usually frequent the stores around us. So it's fairly dire times here at the moment. We took a walk up the main street here today and spoke to local businesses about their experience being back in level 3.
Totally relies on the tourists and everything coming up to keep everyone going, especially over winter. Like, winter can be quite hard, but from our customers, they've all been, really understanding and, happy to, well, obviously not happy to be in lockdown, but I haven't really heard many complaints, or everyone seems to just be getting on with it and making it work how they can.
It's minimal. I don't know if it's 10% of the overall, what we will do usually. We've got a second store in Auckland CBD as well. This one is fully shut, so and it's all sort of made here from Matakana, so it's pretty slow, I would say. Well, we're ready to go back to normal as soon as possible. With the parameters that are given to us in terms of health and safety and all this. I think probably people are getting more cautious this time around. I mean, the second wave probably came more as a surprise to everyone and probably affected a bit more the mood around. I don't feel like people in Matakana are probably overly stressed. They're cautious, as everyone will be.
And we're standing now outside Matakana Village Farmers Market. Now, this would usually be packed with people on Saturdays. That obviously won't be the case this weekend, and potentially not at level 2 either, when gatherings are, of course, still restricted to no more than 100 people. So all in all, it's tough times for villages like Matakana on the outskirts of the Auckland region.
And that's reporter Nick Trubridge with our cameraman Nick Munro in Matakana, and that video will go up on our Facebook page. Let's return now to our earlier stories about the major privacy breach and the new infection at a managed isolation facility in Auckland. Well, joining me now is the Minister in charge of Managed Isolation and Quarantine, Megan Woods. Good evening, Minister. You must feel like you can't get a break here. When did you hear about the privacy breach?
Look, I was briefed on Sunday about the privacy breach, the same day that I was briefed about the positive case. But look, in terms of the privacy breach, that the Chief Executive and Deputy Chief Executive at MB that have been dealing with this briefed me about it, and I was confident that all the right processes that needed to be followed involved with the Commissioner, the Privacy Commissioner, were well underway.
Were you keeping it from the public if you heard out about it on Sunday?
No, this was an operational issue that I was briefed under no surprises, and all the issues all the processes and steps that needed to be undertaken were well underway.
Not very transparent for it only to come out today, though, if you were aware of it on Sunday. Why is that?
Well, it was an operational issue that was being dealt with at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, as it well should be. I was confident in terms of the people whose privacy that it had affected, that they had all been contacted on Sunday, they'd all been telephoned, and there'd been a conversation with them and they knew what to do. So in terms of the transparency I was most concerned about was the people whose privacy was affected, and I was confident that they had all been contacted.
Who screens these workers and makes sure that they understand their obligations working in these facilities?
Look, I mean, there's obviously an employment issue here that it is well below the expectations that there would be people would be photographing lists of people staying at any facility. Doesn't really matter whether or not it's a managed isolation facility, but any facility, and putting it on social media. This was an individual that was employed by a security company, but it is obviously well below our level of expectation of what someone working in one of our managed isolation facilities. And while I haven't been involved, what I was briefed on is that individual is no longer working in a managed isolation facility.
So you're going to keep using the same company? It's First Security this person was employed with. So are they going to keep working with their other security guards at managed isolation facilities?
Oh, look, the issue of security is something that we continue to look into.
Well, are there going to be any repercussions for the company?
Look, we're continuing to work that, as you'll probably appreciate, in terms of the attention and where we've put our efforts. We've had the officials at MB working on that, but we've also put a lot of emphasis on dealing with the case of the positive worker and dealing with that over the last couple of days.
Understand that, and we'll get to it, but who does the buck stop with here in terms of this privacy breach then?
Look, continuing to work through that. Obviously, it is well below anybody's expectation. I am concerned for the individuals whose privacy were breached and those processes were followed.
Okay, so let's turn now to this maintenance worker who's been discovered to have COVID-19. What's the working theory for how they got infected?
Well, in terms of the knowledge of how we got infected, that's something we continue to investigate. I think it really does point to just how tricky and insidious this virus is, because there is no direct line of how it is he got infected. What we do know is that the genomic match for him is someone who was transferred from Ridges, a positive case, who had arrived from LA, who arrived at Ridges on the 28th of July and was transferred to the Jet Park after returning a positive test, was transferred on the 31st. Both have the same strain, a B1, but the mysterious part of it, and the bit we're needing to continue to do some work around, is there wasn't any contact between...
Are you sure of that, Minister? Are you absolutely positive there was no face-to-face contact?
Oh, look, as sure as we can be. So that's as a result of the contact tracing interviews that have taken place. But look, we've also taken added precautions. That we've had a look at the card access on rooms and people swipe cards around the building. We've had a look at CCTV footage. So we're as sure as we possibly can be that there wasn't a contact between these two. What we do know is that the maintenance man had been in the room, but the woman was, but that was several days before she arrived. It was,
can we just
TV and to fix the shower, but the room was not entered even after she left for 14 days.
All right, can we pause for a second there, because this timeline is really important. So the room was cleaned on the 14th of August, correct?
That's right.
She left on the 31st of July, so nobody enters the room after she leaves or before the room is cleaned. You're positive about that?
Yeah, well, that is information I've had, and certainly also the card access to the room also shows that that's the case, that there's no swipe access into that room.
So what day did he enter the room? What date did he enter the room?
So he was in the room on the 21st and the 23rd of July. On the 21st to fix a television, and on the 23rd to fix a shower, I believe.
Okay, so he was already displaying symptoms on the 11th of August. So that suggests he was infected before he entered the room.
No, he entered the room on the 21st of July and the 23rd.
Right.
That he was first described as showing symptoms on the 11th. He had his test on the 13th and returned on the 16th. What we know, and what the Director General has told me about the positive test that he returned, it showed that actually it was a reasonably new infection. So those dates don't match up in terms of the idea that he had COVID when he went into the room on the 21st and 23rd. That is not what the evidence suggests.
But she hadn't even been in the room by then.
No, she hadn't, and that's what I'm saying. This is why we're continuing to look at it and to figure out how this may have spread and how it may have been contracted.
So, are you sure that the woman had it first and the maintenance worker had it second? Can you even be sure about that?
Look,
in terms of the advice we're getting from the medical experts and the clinicians, in terms of what the tests are showing, that certainly is the sequence that they're telling us, and so we're as sure as we can be within the bounds of the expert advice.
Okay, so let's talk about the cleaning of the room. What quality control is done on cleaning? How do you know it happened and it was up to scratch?
Oh, look, the cleaning of the room, I think we need to kind of dismiss any idea this is like housekeeping going in and doing a normal clean of a room. That what we do is a very prescribed set of cleaning that starts actually with the donning and the taking off of the PPE that the person going in to clean the room has to use. And it's what the room was actually cleaned with was with a hospital-grade cleaning level. It's for the hydrogen peroxide vapour sanitisation using a machine called a BioQual machine, which is used in hospitals. So we're talking about deep decontamination.
So the likely scenario
what would
then
happen in a hotel in terms of room service.
Right. So the likely scenario then, Minister, it seems, is that there's a third party that connects the two. Would that be fair to say?
Well, look, actually, there's no evidence of person to person because what we've had is a large number of tests coming back. Certainly, the close contacts of the maintenance worker coming back from that facility, they've all been negative. So there isn't a person in the chain to suggest person to person.
Or you just haven't found them yet.
No. Yeah, and that is a scenario and why we continue to look, and that's why we're retesting every staff member at Ridges today to make sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned. We also need to think about whether or not there is any chance that there is surface transmission there as well.
Okay, so the worker returns the positive test on or around the 16th of August, right? And
on the 16th.
Yeah, so you also note in a press statement put out today that he had symptoms from the 11th of August. So why was he at work?
So he described himself in his contact tracing interview as probably having the symptoms, and when he thinks about it in retrospect from the 11th, I'd like to point out, he was having his daily health checks where he was having his temperature
But that failed then, didn't it? Minister, it failed if he had symptoms, self-recognised symptoms, and he was still at work?
No, I think in retrospect is the important word there. When he has gone back and reflected that he's said, probably what did have some symptoms. If I think about it back to then, he did, in terms of his health check, his temperature is taken. So I haven't had a health check every time I go into a managed isolation facility. They point to.
But Minister, and I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but it does show a failure even if you're saying he's reflecting back and saying he had these symptoms, clearly the system doesn't work. If you can have a worker who has symptoms, they are not disclosed or they're not recognised as a reason to stay at home, that's a failure in screening, isn't it?
Oh, well, I think one of the complications with this case for this gentleman is he does have an underlying health condition that does involve him having a cough, so that he put down his cough to his underlying condition. But I think when he's gone back and thought about it, he's thought, yeah, maybe it was. When I think about it now, I've got a COVID test. But look, we're thinking about every process that might need to change as a result of this. What might need to be put in place. I think what we're seeing here is that this isn't a case of COVID getting into the community because of any system breakdown in our facilities. This isn't about someone breaking in or someone breaking out. It's not someone not doing what they should. This shows how tricky and how insidious this virus is and how we continually have to evolve our systems to assure we're keeping ahead of it.
Before you go, Minister, can I get a yes or no on this? Are you aware of flight crews or any Air New Zealand staff at the border refusing tests?
That's not something I would be aware of.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Megan Woods, who is the Minister in charge of Managed Isolation and Quarantine. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, with the election delayed, MPs found themselves facing off at Parliament today. Child sex offender Philip John Smith was back in court today, and the North versus South rugby game will go ahead, but in Wellington. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening about the new case in the maintenance worker at Managed Isolation and the privacy breach. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And sorry, late to the headlines, second day in a row.
A security guard has been stood down from duty at an Auckland isolation facility after leaking returnees' details. The guard, employed by First Security, posted an image on a private Snapchat group containing names, room numbers and other details of guests staying at the Sheraton 4 Points. A ministry official says this person's actions were unacceptable. First Security is now undertaking an employment investigation. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he expects the latest cluster of COVID-19 to go on to be the country's biggest. To date, the Bluff cluster, which began at a wedding in March, is the country's largest with 98 cases, closely followed by the outbreak at Marist College with 96 cases. So far, the latest Auckland outbreak has 69 confirmed cases. A man who tried to evade the police at a COVID checkpoint south of Auckland yesterday led officers on a short pursuit. The police say the man tried to avoid the checkpoint at Bombay on State Highway 1 by driving down the truck bypass lane. The pursuit was called off because of the man's dangerous driving, but he was later located at a property in Drury and arrested. In Australia, a Victorian Health Department epidemiologist has confirmed the state's second wave of coronavirus cases started at 2 quarantine hotels. Charles Alprin told an inquiry into the hotel quarantine program that at least 99% of the current cases can be linked. A large blaze that ripped through a Palmerston North car yard has been put out. One person was taken to hospital after the fire broke out at We Buy Cars on Keith Street just before midday. And police are continuing to investigate the unexplained death of a baby in Kaitaia yesterday. The 2-month-old was found at an address in the far north town. A post-mortem is underway. Those are the latest news headlines on Rnz National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Emma Hatton, who's in our Wellington studio. Hi, Emma. So another day with some big companies reporting not so great profits. Who have we got today?
Yeah, hi Lisa. We're well into the earnings season, thick of it. It's all very exciting. We had Mercury Energy out today. So the renewable energies firm's profits were down on the year before, down 42%. But if we unpack that, it's not as sad as it sounds. So they made $207 million for the 2020 financial year. Last year they made $357 million, but that was boosted by around about $170 million one-off gain from asset sales. So if you take that out of the equation, their profit was actually up slightly on last year. So, pretty good going for them. They had some hydro issues throughout the year. So there was the drought in the Waikato, which resulted in lower generation from their hydro facilities there. Obviously, lower generation was lower revenue for them. That was offset, though, through lower interest rate and some tax changes. So it did balance out all right for them. Interesting that they've put in their full year results announcement, sort of the outlook resulting around when TY Point exits the industry. It's going to be a big shake-up. So that's always an interesting part to look for. So what Mercury said regarding that is that they are expecting it to cause some market volatility, some swings in wholesale, market prices. But it's relatively sheltered compared to the ones down in the south, like Contact and Meridian. So all of their generation sites are in the North Island. So they're not probably going to be hit as hard. What is going to be interesting for them, though, is that surplus of power that's going to come into the market once TY is gone, and the power that they were using goes out to the retail market. It's going to make consumer pricing really competitive out there, which is great news for consumers, of course, but hard for them to, retain customers. There'll be some good offerings out there, we expect. So that was a little update from Mercury. The other company that we heard from today was PGG Wrightson. So that's the rural services company. They lost money during the lockdown, just a hit to their trading, basically. Similar to Mercury, their net profit was down on last year, but last year's was boosted by an asset sale. So if you take that out of the equation, their profit was actually up. So they've been hit quite hard because of the depressing wool prices that are out there at the moment. Wool prices are very, very low. Boosted, though, horticulture side of the business is going really well for them. So, they're not getting too carried away, but they're fairly optimistic about their future. They did scrap its final dividend payout, though, saying they'll resume once the market settles down a little bit.
Okay, I'm interested in this platform. Now, this is the thing that was set up so people could show some loyalty to their local businesses, right? You could buy a voucher online and use it at a time when you were released from restrictions. So they've had a bit of a boost, have they? What's the story?
Yeah, so this is the platform that was set up right at the start of lockdown was originally called SOS Cafe, and it was you could buy a voucher for your local cafe while they were in lockdown, and then you could use it once they were up and running again. So the idea was just to inject the cash into your favourite business straight away, keep them going. You know, obviously they still had bills to pay at that point. The costs just didn't stop when the lockdown started. And then it was so successful, it spread out and it was offered to all businesses. So it's called SOS Business. And, you know, it just went ballistic. And it was all run by volunteers. It's a not-for-profit. They have 2,500 registered businesses now, and they've done more than $2 million in voucher sales. So the demand actually hasn't really eased since the lockdown restrictions eased. And so, you know, all these volunteers that were setting it up, you know, they had day jobs to get back to and things like that. And it was just really, you know, I think bigger than anyone ever expected. And so they've handed over the website to a US investment firm, which already operates a similar scheme, not quite the same, but what they'll do is they'll basically give the businesses the capital up front and then sell the vouchers through their app later on. So it's a more sure way of the businesses actually getting the money. It's sort of a third-party sales agreement there. And so the founder of the SOS business will stay on in an advisory role just to make sure that, you know, the intent of the scheme stays the same and, you know, the branding will remain and that kind of thing. And this US investment firm is going to put in $5 million for the next year. So that's $5 million guaranteed to be going into small businesses across New Zealand, which, I mean, given the recent lockdowns in Auckland, that's great news for so many out there. It really is quite a good news story, this one, which is really nice to be able to report for a change. And I mean, it's so significant. We keep hearing spend local, support local, and this is just another way that we can do it, and it makes it a lot easier.
Well, what do the numbers on the market say today, Emma?
Market's very happy today. The NZX Top 50 is up 1.5%. That was boosted when Fisher & Paykel Healthcare came out and upgraded its profit guidance for this year. It's doing really well selling its respiratory equipment across the globe. So up 176 points to 11,849. The New Zealand dollar is trading at 65.5 US cents, 90.5 Australian and 49.8 British pence.
Thanks, Emma. That is Emma Hatton with our business news, joining us from our Wellington studio there. A secure dementia facility tried to stop the Chief Ombudsman inspecting their operation during the COVID lockdown, despite him having the legal right to. The Office of the Ombudsman scrutinised 6 secure dementia and psychogeriatric facilities during the earlier COVID Level 3 and 4 lockdowns in April and May to make sure measures to stop the spread of the virus weren't having a detrimental effect on the residents' treatment and conditions. On the whole, the report found the units they inspected were strongly committed to residents' welfare, but 4 recommendations and 21 suggestions have been made for improvements. Chief Ombudsman Judge Peter Bosher says not all aged care facilities rolled out the welcome mat.
One of the facilities was not at all happy with me entering, my staff, and sought legal advice at my request on the lawfulness of us entering. When, as I understand it, a QC advised the rest home owner that we were within our legal rights, the conversation then turned to more positive things. We did enter, we were welcomed, and we got there. So the process in the end was able to be dealt with amicably, but initially quite a bit of apprehension about the Ombudsman and our role.
Why wouldn't they want you in there?
I think that this is wholly new for the private sector in New Zealand. The Ombudsman's known well for the public service agencies such as prisons, mental health units. This is the first time, possibly, that I know of in the world where an Ombudsman's been designated by Parliament to go into private facilities, not owned by the state, but owned by others. And you can see that they wanted to test this fairly carefully because it's space they're not used to.
Okay, so you did go in and you inspected these 6 facilities. Generally, you found that they were really committed to their residents and their residents' welfare. But still a few issues. Let's start with the bubble system. So, did the rest homes understand what a bubble system was, or were they breaching it?
They weren't wholly putting into practice what a bubble should be. We all heard that expression so much from the Prime Minister. I think we understood, most of us, what a bubble was meant to be. Bubbles weren't operating as well as they could have. Now, to give a reasonable context, we were positive and complimentary about the commitment that rest homes had to keep residents safe. This is very vulnerable stuff, and in some countries such as Canada, there's been a disastrous situation in relation to COVID-19 and rest homes. So to be fair, New Zealand's done well, but we've recommended for the future, and that's the purpose of this report, it's to set up a platform for better practice for the future. We've recommended what really is a good bubble to be focused on and implemented.
So some staff at these secure dementia units were moving from one set of residents to another without wearing PPE?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. So PPE in the rest homes wasn't being used uniformly in all situations. That's permissible, of course, but in situations where a bubble was more amorphous than it should have been, we felt that situation should be clarified and made to operate much more clinically.
One incident which caught my attention for all the wrong reasons was the testing of one patient, which was of particular concern to you. Can you explain to me what happened in that situation?
Yes, I can. So it's really important in rest homes where after all, the public can't go in and visit and see that there is assurance that what's being done is being done in a dignified and reasonable fashion. We felt the way that one resident was being tested wasn't dignified. It had to do with the fact that the patient was being held, almost restrained, if you like, in a way that just to our inspectors didn't seem right. It didn't square with that notion of dignity that you should have in relation to an older person. We just didn't like what we saw.
So the person holding the resident was not a nurse or a medical person?
Correct. The person holding the resident's head was a maintenance worker. So not a clinician, but a maintenance worker.
Okay.
Now, I'm not necessarily critical of that. It's just that the more you're trained and the more experience you've got dealing with older people, you know how sensitive touching the head is and what dignity means to an older person. These are all things we'd like to feel rest homes continue to focus on and improve on.
So, contact with families being maintained during these lockdown levels of 3 and 4. A lot of that was done by technology. But what did that mean for residents' ability to have private conversations with their loved ones or family contacts and raise any issues?
Well, there are a number of things in that question that you've raised, and can I mention 3? The first is that we found that in the absence of physical contact, which of course level 4 really brought an end to, that most residents that we went into, most facilities, made a genuine effort to organise Zoom calls. We want to say that mostly contact was promoted and it was well done. But there are 2 things I do want to say. The first is that given no real huge contact, residents have to be given a clear ability to raise issues and make complaints. And we found that needs to be improved. It needs to be worked on. The other thing that we didn't like was evidence of blanket policy that even residents entering palliative care, in other words, about to die, there was evidence of a blanket policy that no visits, notwithstanding, would be countenanced. Now, that can't be right from the point of view of humanity and the ability to look really hard at putting into place a protective mechanism so that dignity can be maintained in that situation. And I know these were unusual and stressful times, but I'd like to feel as we mature and we grow into this work, that we will increase that aspect of reasonableness, fairness and dignity.
So, Judge, you're basically saying there always needs to be an exception to the rule, then?
I'm saying that as a matter, and that's my job. My job here in this office is fairness and reasonableness. Where you have a blanket rule and no ability to exercise discretion, I find that to be contrary to what Parliament's placed me here for, and that is to make sure that everyone is treated with fairness. The problem about a blanket no discretion rule is it can be very unkind and very unfair.
And that's the Chief Ombudsman, Judge Peter Boscher. It is about 6 minutes from 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's head to the US now, and the Democrats have kicked off their national convention, albeit online, as the party officially nominates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as their candidates for the White House. The 4-day event, usually the hallmark of large crowds, balloons and ticker tape, has been downsized to a virtual affair due to the coronavirus crisis. Today's event focused on the pandemic, racial injustice and the economy, and featured keynote speeches from politicians and supporters. Senator Bernie Sanders, once challenger to the Democratic nomination, didn't mince his words in his opening address. He threw his weight behind Joe Biden, saying November's election is the most important in America's modern history and a chance to right the wrongs under President Trump.
Our great nation is now living in an unprecedented moment. We're facing the worst public health crisis in 100 years and the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. We are confronting systemic racism and the enormous threat to our planet of climate change. And in the midst of all of this, we have a president who is not only incapable of addressing these crises, but is leading us down the path of authoritarianism. This election is the most important in the modern history of this country. In response to the unprecedented crises we face, we need an unprecedented response, a movement like never before, of people who are prepared to stand up and fight for democracy and decency, and against greed, oligarchy, and bigotry.
He says authoritarianism under the Trump administration has threatened democracy in America.
During this president's term, the unthinkable has become normal. He has tried to prevent people from voting, undermined the U.S. Postal Service, deployed the military and federal agents against peaceful protesters, threatened to delay the election, and suggested that he will not leave office if he loses. This is not normal, and we must never treat it like it is.
Former First Lady Michelle Obama offered a first-hand observation of the presidency and said Donald Trump is not up to the job.
Donald Trump is the wrong president for our country. He has had more than enough time to prove that he can do the job, but he is clearly in over his head. He cannot meet this moment. He simply cannot be who we need him to be for us. It is what it is. Now, I understand that my message won't be heard by some people. We live in a nation that is deeply divided, and I am a Black woman speaking at the Democratic Convention. But enough of you know me by now. You know that I tell you exactly what I'm feeling. You know I hate politics. But you also know that I care about this nation. You know how much I care about all of our children. So if you take one thing from my words tonight, it is this. If you think things cannot possibly get worse, trust me, they can and they will if we don't make a change in this election. If we have any hope of ending this chaos, we have got to vote for Joe Biden like our lives depend on it.
And that was the former First Lady Michelle Obama speaking at the Democratic National Convention. A lot of you are getting in touch about the story about the security breach in terms of private information of some returnees in an isolation hotel. A security guard's been stood down after posting a picture that revealed their names, 27 returnees staying at the facility, along with their room numbers and details of 5 staff members. This person says the security guards are employees of a private company and the breach of private data is an employment issue. The fact that a maintenance worker has been found to have COVID has to be a wake-up call in terms of their wearing of protective gear and more compulsory and regular testing. I think we all became complacent once we moved to level 1. Someone else says all inbound passengers must be tested on arrival on day 0 at hour 0. Someone else querying why the room of the person believed to be the source of the COVID was not cleaned for 14 days. Is that how hotels run?
Rnz News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The Minister in charge of COVID-19 isolation facilities says she was first alerted to a privacy breach at an Auckland isolation facility on Sunday. A first security guard has been stood down from duties after releasing personal information of people arriving in the country to a private group on Snapchat while on shift at the Sheraton 4 Points managed isolation facility. Megan Woods told Checkpoint she was not keeping the information from the public.
No, this was an operational issue that I was briefed under no surprises, and all the issues, all the processes and steps that needed to be undertaken were well underway.
Megan Woods, the Minister in charge of managed isolation facilities. The COVID-19 community cluster in Auckland is on track to be the largest the country has ever seen. To date, the Bluff cluster, which began at a wedding in March, is the country's largest with 98 cases, closely followed by the outbreak at Marist College with 96 cases. So far, the latest Auckland outbreak has 69 confirmed cases. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he expects the latest outbreak will be the biggest because they are able to more effectively trace the new cases.
Because we've got all those close contacts in isolation and are testing them, we will have a better idea of all, and this is what we want to have, of all the cases associated with the cluster. Whereas it would have been in our earlier clusters earlier in the year, there would have been other cases that were not identified, but because of the lockdown arrangements, there was no further community onward transmission.
Today, Dr Bloomfield confirmed 13 new COVID cases, 12 of which are linked to the South Auckland cluster and 1 thought likely to be linked. Frontline doctors want more stringent COVID-19 testing in rest homes. The Colleges of Emergency Medicine, General Practitioners and Urgent Care have signed a joint statement pointing out areas where our health system is not meeting best practice. The President of the Royal College of GPs, Samantha Merton, says the elderly are disproportionately affected by outbreaks, and this can place added pressure on the health system.
The thing about any increase in number of COVID people who are very, very sick is that then starts to impact on the whole of the health service because you've got very unwell people in a hospital, and then the hospital has to shut down some of its services.
Samantha Merton says health authorities need to do a lot more testing. In Australia, a Victorian Health Department epidemiologist has confirmed the state's second wave of coronavirus cases started at 2 quarantine hotels. Charles Alprin told an inquiry into the hotel quarantine program that at least 99% of the current cases can be linked. Meanwhile, 17 more people with coronavirus have died in Victoria in the last day, and there are 222 new infections, the lowest daily tally in a month. New Zealand officials involved in bringing murderer Philip John Smith back to the country have been defended. Smith escaped to Chile and Brazil in November 2014 while on temporary release from Spring Hill Prison, where he was serving a life sentence for murder. He's been at the Court of Appeal today, appealing his 2 years, 9 months sentence for the escape. Crown lawyer Fergus Sinclair denied Smith's accusations that the deportation was a disguised extradition.
We submit there's no evidence of misconduct by New Zealand agents here. They weren't in a position to influence the judge's decision to deport, nor were they able to manipulate the inaction of other courts.
The Court of Appeal judges reserved their decision. A large blaze that ripped through a Palmerston North car yard has been put out. Fire and emergency was called just before midday to a fire at We Buy Cars on Keith Street. A man who was buying a ute when the fire started says a worker was using a power tool near fuel. He says a big LPG tank and vehicle fuel tanks exploded in the fire, causing big black plumes of smoke to drift over Palmerston North. One person was taken to hospital with moderate injuries. The milestone of 10 million e-book downloads was hit by Auckland Council Libraries' online collections this month. Auckland's the first library system in the Southern Hemisphere to reach the 10 million mark on Overdrive, the system used by many libraries and schools. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was among the top titles downloaded. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Kiwis and Cronulla Rugby League player Shaun Johnson has changed his mind about supporting his New Zealand teammate Kevin Proctor when the Gold Coast forward faces the NRL judiciary tonight. Proctor was sent off in Saturday's NRL game in Sydney for allegedly biting Johnson in an incident that has divided the rugby league community. Felicity Reid has more.
Straight after Saturday's clash, Johnson said he had no plans to take part in tonight's hearing, but the Kiwis playmaker appears to have had a change of heart. Johnson took to social media and wrote that he'd be supporting Proctor at the judiciary because he believes Proctor being sent off and ultimately costing his team the game is big enough punishment. Proctor was the first player in the NRL's 112-year history to be sent off for biting. He will deny the charge but faces a lengthy suspension if found guilty. This is Felicity Reid.
The All Blacks coach Ian Foster has had his say on the future of Super Rugby in New Zealand. Decisions are still to be made on how the competition will look next season and in the future. Foster says as much as he enjoyed this year's New Zealand-only competition, he'd like to see at least some Australian teams added.
What we've seen is a great competition that's been perfect for 2020. Quite frankly, it's been the only option we've had, so I'm glad it worked out well. But I'm not sure that 5 teams is 100% sustainable as a long-term competition.
Ian Foster, the All Blacks coach. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we've got a window on the world of the words we use to describe cancer. Trevor Reiki talks with English guitarist Justin Adams about his love for African, especially Gambian music. And we've got a couple of after-dinner speakers, Louise Richards and Linda Johnston, talking about the geography of gender and what feminists can tell us about the shape and function of human settlements on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel Peninsula. Rain in Northland, but isolated showers elsewhere. Rain spreading south tonight or tomorrow morning before easing to isolated showers tomorrow night. Nor'easterlies, gale in exposed places for a time. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloud increasing. Isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow with heavy falls possible. Nor'easterly strengthening, gale in Gisborne tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also Taihape and Wairarapa. Fine tonight, occasional rain tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough and Buller through to Fiordland, becoming cloudy, rain developing tonight, heavy falls, clearing tomorrow night. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, high cloud, patchy light rain tomorrow. And Chatham Islands, fine spells and a chance of a shower. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A first security guard at a managed isolation facility has been suspended after a privacy breach at the weekend. The guard, who was on shift at Auckland's Sheraton 4 Points Hotel, sent a Snapchat message to a private group with the personal details of 27 returnees on Saturday. The Minister for Managed Isolation and Quarantine, Megan Woods, told us earlier that she found out about the breach on Sunday and it was unacceptable. First Security has declined to be interviewed tonight, but in a statement says it's disappointed with the misguided actions of one individual. It says it apologises to those affected and a full investigation is underway. Gary Morrison is the CEO of the New Zealand Security Association and he joins me now. Thanks for your time, Gary. Well, let's cut to the chase. How bad is this?
Unacceptable is the right word for it. That would be our view on it. We are dealing with people, but confidentiality of information is critical within the security industry, and that's something we have to live by. So unacceptable, I think, is the appropriate wording for it.
Because that's the whole purpose, isn't it? Security, whether it be of private information, people or property, that's the core business of this company, security.
It is indeed, yes. Yep.
So are there any circumstances where sending a Snapchat, an Instagram or a selfie, if you're a security person, taking a picture on site and then posting it to any kind of group, is that acceptable at any point?
No, it's not acceptable. And for any security staff, we go through initial training, and part of that is covering the confidentiality information right up front. So that is part of the initial training. It's also covered within employment contracts, and particularly around social media postings and the dangers that are associated with that.
Yeah, so what are they told specifically about
aware.
that? Sorry, Gary, what are they told specifically about that? Social media, what are they told?
Within contracts, we'll normally say it's totally prohibited and the dangers that are associated with that. So staff are made very aware right up front around confidentiality and the importance of that information, but in particular watching out for social media, where it can very, very quickly be dispersed widely.
So the details here say that it was posted to a private group on Snapchat. Does that make it any better, private group?
Not really, no. It still leaves that information within the private personal domain where it can be sent by any person.
So how can we trust this company then? Because they've got a vital role here, right, in helping keep this country safe. So how can we trust this company now?
Well, First Security is one of our members. They're a very large provider. They're very reputable. And I can certainly vouch for their employment processes. They have taken this very seriously, as they have with any other breaches that may occur. And I know that they've been very constructive in the approach they've adopted to any of those breaches, putting in place measures to make sure they just can't reoccur. I think it is important to remember we're dealing with people, and people do silly things, but it is unacceptable. And in this case, I can rest assured that First will be addressing that and addressing it appropriately.
So what needs to happen now then?
They'll go through their discipline process with that individual, and I'm sure they'll be followed through appropriately. There's already been communication go out to all staff within First. I'm aware of that. And within the
what
industry,
does that say, Gary? Have you seen what that says? What have they said to their workers?
I haven't. I have to say, I was only just made aware of this very, very recently. But I know also that reminders will go out right across the various providers who are working at the managed isolation facilities with exactly that same message. It's not acceptable.
I know this is obviously just unfolding, but have you had a chat to the bosses at First Security?
Not on this matter, no.
Okay. Are you aware of any other breaches like this, or have any other concerns around issues like this at managed isolation and quarantine?
There's previously been reports of guards sleeping. It was a very small number, and I am certainly aware that appropriate measures were put in place to prevent that from reoccurring.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Gary Morrison, who is the CEO of the New Zealand Security Association. And with the election delayed, MPs unexpectedly found themselves back at Parliament today, and National took full opportunity to challenge the government over border controls and testing. Senior ministers, including the Prime Minister, have been on the defensive after it was revealed last week that, contrary to promises made to the public, a large number of people working at the border and in isolation facilities were not being tested regularly at New Zealand's most vulnerable point. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, filed this report.
Yeah, well, it's not anything that we expected. So we expected it all be back out on the campaign trail. I'm here in Wellington for the duration. I can't go back home.
It's a little weird, I have to say, but really our thoughts are primarily with the people in Auckland, and in particular those people who are directly affected by the current outbreak.
MPs finding themselves back in the capital for the next few weeks for a bare-bones parliamentary session, with only party leaders and senior ministers and spokespeople in attendance. National's Judith Collins was squaring up for a fight, speaking to reporters at Parliament this morning.
This absolute failure, and the fact that the New Zealand public have not been
been told the truth.
Last week it was revealed 60% of border staff had never had a COVID test, despite ministers and officials saying for some months all staff would be tested regularly. That's now been made mandatory, while defending the miscommunication that had resulted in testing not being done to the expected level. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said the Health Ministry had advised some time ago there was some reluctance from some staff to get tested. Judith Collins says that's not what she was told by staff who had got in touch with her personally.
They were not refusing to have tests, that they were in fact not offered tests, and even some people have contacted us to say that they asked for tests and were refused them because they were asymptomatic.
Ms Ardern says she was only reflecting what she'd been told by officials.
That some staff had declined testing. Again, though, that was part of us questioning why our numbers were where they were when we were offering testing at 2 occasions in that July period at the border itself.
The Auckland cluster, and now a case with the different genome sequencing to that cluster, have brought intense scrutiny back onto the government response. The New Zealand First Leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says the testing failures of border staff are alarming.
When commitments were made for the proper use of assets and utilities and preparation and all the things that we're meant to do, when I find defects and shortcomings in that, then I do get concerned.
He says heads should roll.
The buck stops at the top. It always does. No. Frequently, people they are accountable, but they're not responsible. Now, that's a fair constitutional position, but in the end, the person at the top who's been given the responsibility has to be the person that answers. That's what democratic accountability looks like.
Mr Peters clarified he wasn't calling on the Health Minister to resign, but rather to find out what happened and hold someone accountable. Then he doubled down on his comments the Auckland cluster had happened because of a security breach at the border, talking then about a second breach.
This is a fact. Well, the first one is what we are looking at now with respect to the cluster. If you do not think that came through the border, then you're not understanding what is sort of Oxham's razor, which is that the most simple explanation will usually be the right one.
So how did it come?
It's elementary, and I don't know why people are trying to say it's not the case.
Contradicted by the Prime Minister a short time later in Parliament after a question from Health Minister Chris Hipkins.
Has any clear link between the current cluster outbreak in Auckland and any incursion at the border been established?
Mr Speaker, no, not at this stage, as I set out in my primary question.
ACT's David Seymour told the House this latest case, not connected to the cluster but linked to a person who recently arrived from the US and tested positive in late July, was only discovered by good luck, not good management.
Had it not been for the scare and the increase in testing, that person would be out in the community and we would be none the wiser.
Responding to National's Judith Collins in question time, Jacinda Ardern said there had been an issue with the coding of tests for border staff, and once that was sorted, it became apparent not enough testing was being carried out.
After we received a breakdown of those individuals being tested, it was clear to us that we weren't getting full coverage, which is why on the 22nd of July, we set down a cabinet minute, our expectation that it be mandated that every staff member working in those facilities be tested because we were concerned about the coverage of those staff.
Ms Collins asked why the public was not told back in July.
If, as the Prime Minister says, there were such issues around coding and other matters, then why didn't she tell New Zealanders of this problem when she knew about it?
Mr Speaker, we did identify that issue, which is why we moved to on-site testing on the 10th of July, because we identified that, Mr Speaker. We also, of course, as I've said, had every expectation, and that is all that I've ever articulated, that border staff were being tested because that is what we were advised.
Parliament's due to sit for at least 2 weeks, perhaps 3, but it will be a stripped-back operation. Question time will be held as usual to give the opposition a chance to challenge ministers on the COVID response. However, there won't be any select committee hearings or legislation progressed unless the need for an urgent law change arises. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Auckland teachers and principals are divided over whether to bring some of their Year 12 and 13 students back to class. Some principals feel blindsided by the government's decision to let them reopen for limited numbers of senior students, while others plan to make the most of it. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The decision to allow Years 12 and 13 back in bubbles of 20 follows pressure from Auckland Grammar School, which wants to bring boys back for 1 day a week for one subject they want help with. The school's head prefect, Michael Hiddleston, says he'll be doing it, but not all will.
Some of the guys quite like being able to work at home at their own pace, and obviously some boys have health requirements that mean that it's not really practical for them to come back to school. But on the whole, I think a lot of the guys, especially my Year 13 mates, they want to be able to enjoy the last few weeks of school and have it in that school environment, even if it is only for 1 day a week.
Michael believes it will be safe to return to class as long as everyone follows the rules. But not everyone agrees. Maury Abraham from the Post-Primary Teachers Association's Principals Council says the rule change has surprised and undermined principals.
If this was a good idea, then it should have been prepared for and it should have been announced last week when we went to Alert Level 3. We've all gone ahead and communicated our well thought through plans to our communities, only to find halfway through that, there's something else that we need to consider.
He says the change will affect only about 6 days of schooling and it isn't worth the risk. The president of the Auckland Secondary Principals Association, Steve Hargraves, says the reaction from its members has been mixed.
Right from very excited, already got plans well in place to try and make it work once the green light is given today with the change to the health orders, to people who are dead against it, saying it's going to put teachers under pressure, added health risks for staff, and they're against it for those reasons.
He says the rules for reopening are complicated, and his school, Maclean's College, is still considering whether it can make it work. Michael Cabral-Tarry is the Post-Primary Teachers Association's Auckland Regional Chair. He says principals have been asking teachers to come in and teachers feel torn.
On the one hand, they want to look after their own health and the health of their own families, but at the same time they feel pressured to go into school and to work with their students. It's putting a number of teachers in a very, very unfortunate and very tricky place.
At Pakuranga College, the principal, Mike Williams, says the sudden change in the lockdown rules is confusing for the community and won't be easy to use.
We're talking about getting a head start of an extra 5 days of teaching and maybe, but you can't really teach because you couldn't have all the students, so some might benefit, some wouldn't. We're looking as to whether we can use the flexibility a little bit. So we're looking at a few of our Year 13 only and practical subjects where there's a real critical issue.
The principal of Mangere College, Tom Webb, says it will reopen for Year 12 and 13 students who are finding it hard to work from home. But he warns students are likely to get supervision rather than active teaching.
The majority of it will be working on the same work that students are working on from home. So we use Google Classroom and teachers putting up all the work on there. There may be some possibility of using some of the practical spaces in school, like art rooms, for example. And there may be some students working on particular subjects in there as well.
Tom Webb says he's not expecting a lot of students because the Mangere community is very worried about the spread of COVID-19. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The Education Ministry says 10 schools have so far applied to reopen for Year 12 and 13 classes. It's almost 23 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Child sex offender Philip John Smith is accusing the government of unlawfully bringing him back to New Zealand after his audacious overseas escape. Smith skipped the country in November 2014 and went to Chile and Brazil while on temporary release from Spring Hill Prison, where he was serving a life sentence for murder. He's been at the Court of Appeal to appeal the 2 years, 9 months handed down to him for the escape. Jonathan Mitchell was in court.
While behind bars, Smith successfully renewed his passport under his birth name, Trainer. On temporary release from Spring Hill, he managed to board a flight to Chile and travelled on to Brazil. He was captured 6 days later after tourists in a Rio hostel recognised him. Smith appeared at the Court of Appeal in Wellington this morning via video link from prison after his request to appear in person was rejected. His argument is that the deportation process was illegal under Brazilian law and says New Zealand authorities thought extradition was tricky.
New Zealand were very anxious to ensure that that did not happen. If an extradition process was followed, they may not be able to be brought back to New Zealand at all.
Smith told the court Brazil prohibits life sentences. The maximum over there is 30 years. He also says that country has a more relaxed approach to absconders.
My understanding is that the Brazilians do not recognise escape as an offence because they attach such a high value to freedom such that they consider that it would be only natural for a prisoner to wish to escape to obtain his freedom.
That struck a chord with the three judges who laughed and smiled at that statement. Crown lawyer Fergus Sinclair denied Smith's accusations that the deportation was a disguised extradition. He defended the New Zealand officials that were involved in bringing Smith back, including a detective sergeant who flew to Rio.
We submit there's no evidence of misconduct by New Zealand agents here. They weren't in a position to influence the judge's decision to deport, nor were they able to manipulate the inaction of other courts. And there's no evidence of Mr Pannett even trying to do so.
The judges reserved their decision. Smith's escape prompted an inquiry, and Parliament passed a law to make it harder for prisoners to do so in future. He's already serving a life sentence for murdering the father of a boy he was sexually abusing. That was not part of his appeal today. He was denied parole earlier this year and will be seen again by the parole board in 2022. For Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
Established All Blacks, fringe players and informed talent have all been included in the squads for the upcoming North versus South rugby match. After weeks of debate, the All Blacks selectors today named the teams for the revival of the once regular inter-island fixture. However, where the game is played is still unclear and depends on whether Auckland stays in COVID Alert Level 3. Clay Wilson has more.
It's all happening. Kenny Lynn and Dane Coles have gone toe-to-toe. You tell me this match doesn't mean anything, and then have a look at this.
A young Dane Coles was in the thick of it during the last North versus South match 8 years ago. And judging by recent comments to an All Blacks teammate, the Hurricanes hooker will be again when the fixture returns next weekend. Manawatu born and raised, but a long-time Crusaders favourite, Sam Whitelock says Coles was keen the two were in opposing teams.
Dane and I know each other pretty well growing up, not too far down the road from each other, and it ended up being, Colesy, do you want me on the other team so you can punch me and give me a spray? So there's going to be heaps of banter out there.
Whitelock will captain the South Island side, with Blues skipper Patrick Tuipulotu to lead the North for what is a throwback for many Kiwi rugby fans. The inter-island contest was highly anticipated during the sport's amateur days, only world wars preventing it from being played every year between 1905 and 1986. Tuipulotu says the current crop are excited to add to the history.
For us to experience that sort of rivalry, I know we obviously experience it with the Blues and the Crusaders all the time, but it'd be good to get stuck in and experience something new.
Tuipulotu and Whitelock take charge of 28-man squads littered with regular All Blacks. But All Blacks coach Ian Foster says the match also provides opportunity to some who might not otherwise have got it.
Having this game is sort of forced us to go down much deeper in terms of our watching, so not just for potentially the 35 that we're going to pick, but to go another 20 or 30 deeper and make sure we're really, really clear about the talent coming through. And it's rewarded a whole lot of different ranges of players.
The match offers some mouth-watering matchups, none more so than the battle between respective first fives Bowden Barrett and Richie Moanga. But All Black selector Grant Fox is reinforcing it isn't the be-all and end-all when it comes to selecting the next New Zealand squad.
I don't want to downplay this game, but we've had 10 weeks of Super Rugby Aotearoa to judge players on too. This is just another game in that process. So, this game is not going to be absolutely defining for everyone in this group.
With the teams selected, the next job is confirming where the match will be played. Auckland is scheduled to host, but if the city stays in COVID Alert Level 3 beyond next Wednesday, it'll go to Wellington. Auckland's status also means the squads are assembling in Wellington on Monday. New Zealand Rugby is waiting on travel exemptions for 12 Auckland-based players, and Foster says they're planning as best they can.
We're doing what most businesses and organisations are doing, is that you just take the information you got right now, develop a plan to get a few what-ifs underway, but we're certainly hopeful of players being able to assemble early next week in Wellington, and clearly there's a few hurdles that we have to climb in order for that to happen.
And that was the All Blacks coach, Ian Foster, ending that report from Clay Wilson. Some quick feedback before we head off this evening. This listener says, if this virus is too tricky for managed isolation in Auckland and Melbourne, then perhaps the gains we have made should not be threatened by a minority returning. Time to limit access to New Zealand further. Roger's got in touch to say this tricky virus yarn is tiresome. Equally, we're told that hand washing and hand sanitizer will kill the virus. Can't have it both ways. Ministers won't accept they've blown the early success with general complacency and incompetence at the border. Someone else says the Ridges maintenance worker with COVID may have got it from a third party. All people who have left Ridges from mid-July should be tested. Could be a super spreader somewhere in Auckland, they say. And on the privacy breach, Leah says, why blame the company? It's people that need to take responsibility, like not wearing masks and getting tested months ago. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget you can check out our video stories online. First up, we'll be back with you first thing tomorrow.
Rnz News Headlines at 6:30. A security guard at Auckland Managed Isolation Facility has been removed from duty after sharing private guest information on social media. Officials are perplexed about how a maintenance worker at an isolation facility became infected with COVID-19. The Green Party co-leader James Shaw says the US president's comments about a big surge in cases in New Zealand are absurd, and scientists in the US believe Death Valley in California has registered the highest temperature ever recorded on Earth, 54.4 degrees. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Some businesses in Auckland, they aren't able to operate at all, so they have no revenue. For public-facing businesses in retail, hospitality, restaurants.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.